Welcome again to RC Fun and Games. I am Ryan, and today we're going to be doing a full 110 scale build using one of the awesome new 110 scale chassis from Injora. And the chassis we're going to be using is the center transmission setup chassis that was recently released by Injora. They released two different varieties, one with a transmission up front and a transfer case in the center, and then this version with the transmission in the center. And recently I featured this on my YouTube channel. We did a quick unboxing to see exactly what we got with one of these chassis kits. Now I've ordered a whole bunch of Injora parts to go with this build. All these parts you see over here were purchased from their site, so you'll be able to do the same build just using Injora parts. And the axles I went with are these awesome new aluminium axial worth axles that Injora just released. I found them on their site, so I thought I would give this a try. I ordered two front sets, so we're going to be making a four-wheel steer rig. Besides that, I picked up some of their longest links. I just went for the longest all the way around because I want to make a stretched out rig. Besides that, I picked up some of their brushless 35 kilogram servos. And of course, I picked up some drive shaft to go with this build. And I've got some X-Pin tires and some rims that I've used on a previous build that I've removed, so we'll be using those on here. Now to power this awesome build, I'm gonna be using one of the 1800 kV Outrunner setups from Secure. This is the same brushless system that I featured in my Traxxas TRX4 Defender, and so far this thing has been performing flawlessly. It is one awesome setup, and once again Secure was nice enough to send this out to me to feature in this 110 scale build. Now I think it's time to jump in the garage and get these parts assembled to this chassis so we can get out and go and do some testing with this super crazy stretched out rig that I'm going to be building. Okay, so now that we're in the garage, and to start off this build, I'm going to grab the motor first and I'm going to get that installed onto the transmission. So let's get this motor out of here, and as you can see, like always, packed really nicely by the company Secure. Let me show you guys this awesome Outrunner motor. As you can see, this is the 3625 from Secure, and it's the 1800 kV Outrunner motor. And as you can see from in there, it is a really good quality motor. So far, this thing has performed flawlessly. Okay, so now that I've got the motor over here, I might as well grab this chassis. Let's get this transmission out, and to do that, you're going to remove these 4 screws. Okay, so now that I've got the transmission out, let's get this thing open. And as we can see, it's got some ball bearings and some solid metal gears in there. Now, let's grab this plate over here because this is the one we need, and we're going to need to get our motor installed onto here. Now with the chassis you do get the pinion gear, and it looks like it also comes with 2 screws. So let's grab that. You also get your grub screws. Now let's start by getting the pinion gear installed. Now let's get our grub screw on our pinion gear, and don't forget a drop of Loctite for sure on this one. No need to over tighten it, just make sure it's seating really well on that flat spot on the shaft. Now we can get it installed onto the transmission plate, and once again I highly recommend a bit of Loctite on these as well. Now let's get some grease into the transmission, and I'm just going to be using some of the Injora diff grease. Now, you don't want to overpack the grease on your gears, just make sure it's got a nice layer, because if you put too much, it's just going to push it out of the way and it serves absolutely no purpose. So just make sure you get it into the bottom of those teeth, and like that, you know you've got more than enough grease to not wear away the gears. And now I see I've got another problem. You can't really install the motor when the transmission's open. I have to take out the screw. I'm gonna have to install this screw first. And once again, I'm gonna have to remove the other one as well to get the last screw in. So After watching me, you already know no point assembling the motor until you've got the transmission greased up and closed up. Okay, and now we're going to set the mesh on our pinion gear. Now, as you can see, we've got a little bit of play, which is a perfect mesh in my opinion. Sounds silent to me, so I'm pretty sure that will work great. Now, I'm just going to crank these up a little bit to make sure they don't move. Now that we've got those, we can close up our transmission. Okay, so now that we've got all this mounted up, let's grab our chassis and let's drop this back in here. Now, as you can see, you've got two sets of holes on the chassis. I'm going to be using the lower ones to get the transmission to sit a little bit more to the center, allowing for enough space for the drive shaft and, of course, the links. Now I'm going to grab one of the axles and I'm going to start by fitting one of the servos to it so I can start getting my links attached and get it attached to the chassis. But might as well get the servo installed first. Now, like I mentioned, I'm going to be using the Injora 35 kilogram brushless servo. I have tried the cordless one. That one works really well, so I think it's time to give the brushless one a try. Now, let's just get that installed on, yeah? Now, I do notice there's no bolts that come with the servo or with the axle to install the servo, so make sure you pick up some bolts. I recommend just picking up one of these kits. Like that, you'll have all the screws you need, and they are easy enough to find on Amazon, AliExpress, any of those kind of sites have it. Okay, so now that I've got the servo installed on the axle, I'm going to open up to make sure it's got grease in there, and I'm also going to go over the hardware to make sure everything is tight. Okay, so as we can see, it's got a bit of grease in there, but it's not been very well put, so it's not really spread all over the teeth. So I'm going to remove that grease and I'm going to fit some of my own grease. Okay, so now that I've removed most of that grease from the axle, I'm going to be using this grease over here, which is the Ultimate Racing, and this is a gearbox Teflon grease. So let's get this open and let's get some spread all over those teeth. Okay, so as you can see, I've got a nice coat of this grease all over the teeth. Now, let's get it closed up. Okay, so I've gone over all the hardware on the axle, and I'm glad I did. There was quite a few screws loose, and these had absolutely no Loctite, so make sure you go over your axles and just make sure they are greased as well. Now, let's move on to the next stage. Let's get our links assembled so we can start getting these axles onto the chassis. And like I mentioned, I went for the longest links I can get. As I'm not doing a specific build, I'm just trying to build a stretched out rig. So I went for the 155s with the bent angle, and I also went for the 155 straight ones. Now let's see if I can make this work on these axles, because they might be too long or one might be too short, so let's just see exactly. Okay, so now that I've shown you the lengths that I'm using, let me get these assembled, and to assemble them it's really easy. Just screw the plastic end on and push your ball joint in. So I'll be right back once I've got all these assembled. Okay, so now that I've got all the links assembled, it's time to get them installed. Okay, so I noticed immediately when I tried to fit the upper links that there is no thread in the far hole, so I've had to put thread in it, and they also don't supply the hardware needed to install the upper links. So I'll definitely be letting Injora know that there's a few things missing about these axles and they need to check it out. Okay, so now that we've got all our links installed, I'm going to grab my shocks. Let's get these open. Let's get them filled up with oil so we can get them installed as well on the axle before we try and fit it to the chassis. And as you can see, I went for these dual spring Injora shocks. They feel quite nice, but those springs do feel quite hard. So I'm probably not going to run any springs on these shocks, so I'm not too worried about the springs. Let's get them disassembled. Let's get them filled up with some oil so we can move on. As you can see, there's definitely a bit of oil in there, but I'm going to empty it and put some fresh oil. I'm going to be using 51 WT, and if it's still too thick, I might actually go down to a 20 WT. But for now, let's try the 51. Okay, so now that I've emptied it nicely, I'm going to start filling it up. Now, I'm not going to fill up the shock completely. Okay, so now that I've got the shocks capped off and filled up, I have left them with a bit of preload so I can try and run them without springs and see how this setup works. I can always mess with it in the future, but this has worked well for me in the past, so I'm first going to give this setup a try before I mess with it anymore. Now it's time to get these shocks assembled to the axle so we can get this axle onto the rig, and of course then we can start on the front axle. Okay, so now that we've got the shocks on, the only thing left to do is to get our drive shaft on. Okay, so now that I've got the drive shaft and everything else on, it's time to get it assembled to the chassis. And at the same time, I am fitting the skid plates as I'm fitting the bottom links. Okay, so now that we've got the two bottom links on, I'm going to grab my drive shaft and I'm going to get that on. Okay, so there's a few things I didn't show on camera because it was just too fiddly to do on camera, so I'm quickly going to talk about what I've done. So as you can see over here, on the shocks, I've had to use a double spacer because these axles are extremely wide and the points where they go to sit so far away from the actual chassis. I had to put these extra spaces to allow for full articulation on the rear axle. Now, I also changed out the upper links as they were just too long and I couldn't get them to work. I could have made them work if I put a bend in them, but I knew I had these extra links, so just to let you all know, these are the 130 mil, the bottom ones are 155, and it seems to sit perfectly well like this. Plenty of articulation with these 120 mil shocks. Now, I'm going to prepare the front axle, I'm going to get it all assembled, and then I'll be right back to show you guys exactly what I'm going to do to the upper links to make the front axle work. Okay, so now that I've got the front axle all ready, I've also set up the shocks exactly the same as the rear. Now, it's time to get it all assembled, so... Now I might as well move on and fit my drive shaft, and don't forget when doing this, keep it in phase. And for those that don't know what in phase means keeping the lugs in the same position and once again the next lugs in the same position. The reason you want them phased properly is because it gives you a much smoother drive than having them out of phase. Now let's just get this one installed over there on the transmission. Okay, now before I get this installed, I just want to show you exactly what I've done to my upper links, and as you can see, I've bent them so they can clear the drive shaft. There's not much room on the sides here, and of course also to use the long extended ones and still have the right length for the uppers, I had to put these bends in so that we can get full articulation and of course avoid this drive shaft. Okay, so now that I've pointed out exactly what I have done, it's time to get all these links on so we can see if it does all work correctly or if I'm still going to have to mess around with a few more things. Okay, so now as you can see how those links are sitting around that drive shaft, you are getting just enough clearance for it not to catch on anything. Okay, so I installed the electronics so I can get the servo centralized, so I can get the servo horns on. And it's very simple. You just make sure the middle cable is plugged in with the middle cable coming from the motor, and if the motor is running the wrong way, just flip the outer cables. That will sort out the direction of the motor problem. Now, when it comes to your receiver, we all know the first channel is for our front servo, the second channel is for our throttle, and the third channel is where I've plugged in my rear steering. Now, let's get the system plugged in so that we can get those two centralized and get the servo horns on. Okay, I'm just going to be putting that there, turn this on. I've already done the binding between the receiver and the transmitter. It's very easy, just turn on your transmitter, just hit the button in the back over here on the receiver, and it will connect automatically to the transmitter. Then of course you can change the name to whichever name you want, so you can just change between the profiles and select whichever vehicle you want. Now let's get the battery plugged in, and I picked this up from my local hobby store, RC Store Algarve. So if you live in the Algarve and you're looking for some parts for your RCs, don't forget to check out RC Store Algarve. Now I've already got the receiver turned on. All I'm going to do is plug this in. Okay, there, it's connected. Now I've already set all the trims to 0, so I know they are central. So let's get this cut off. Grab one of the servo horns. So by the looks of it, it's pretty much straight down we want it. Definitely make sure you put a bit of Loctite on this one. Don't over tighten it, but make sure you get a decent bite on it. Now I'm going to quickly install this one. Let's put a little bit of Loctite on this one as well. And also make sure you put a bit of Loctite on this one. I'm going to quickly set up my steering trim. Now to set up your trim on these, I always recommend using the sub trim. Like that, you've still got the normal trim to play with, and it doesn't affect how much it's going to turn one way or the other way. Okay, so that's the way I'm setting it up. It looks like it's pretty straight right now to me. So let's see. Okay, now I'm going to set my dwell rate on the servo just to make sure the endpoints are right. So as we can see, when I turn that way, that's not bad. There's nothing wrong there. When I go the other way, it's touching right there at the end. So let's just go in here. Let's press yes. Let's go down to 90%. Okay. We're going to go 85%. Okay, that's reaching the maximum angle, but it's not pushing into the axle anymore, which is perfect and exactly the way you want it. So like that, you're not forcing your servo all the time. So I've ended up setting it to 85% instead of 100%. Now let's exit. Okay, so now like I mentioned, this servo is plugged into channel 3. So I have basically done a mixing between the two channels by using the proxy 1 and 2. Okay. Now, proxy 1, I have set it to SWC, and on the position DM, if I move it backwards, it turns it on, which then allows for this servo to turn the opposite way, so crabbing. If I put it that way, it then turns the same way, so we've got a really tight turn. Now, to do this, you set it up plus 100 and plus 100 right. Okay, now entering the second menu, you are going to choose the same channel. The only differences are going to be minus 100 left, minus 100 right. That means when this switch is in the middle, you've got no active servo in the back. When you push it forward, it crabs, and when you go the opposite way, it turns a really tight circle. And if you put it back to the center and use this one, you can turn the servo individually with the switch. So just like a real monster truck. So that's how I've set up my 4-wheel steer. Now I know that one's centralized, so let's get the servo horn on there. Okay, I'm not going to bore you all installing this one. I've already shown you how to do the other one. Now I just want to point out that you'll also have to set the endpoints on this one, but it's quite easy. Just go to channel 3 in the sub trim and set your endpoints. Now, let me quickly get this installed. I'll be right back so we can finish off everything by installing the electronics and fitting the wheels. Okay, so now that we've got this one installed, let's just check. So, as you can see, there's absolutely no servo active now. If I turn it up, it does the same steering angle, so now it's grabbing. And if I flip the switch downwards, I've got them turning exactly the same way. And of course, I can put the switch back to the middle, and I can use the lower switch, SWB, and it automatically turns the back servo all the way over to one side and all the way over to the other side. Okay, so now that I've got all this installed, it's time to get our wheels on and get these electronics stuck down in their place and all the cables tidied up. Now, I'm not going to bore you guys with all that, but I do want to mention one thing before I carry on. Using the electronics from Secure, you have got multiple options for your power out to your servo, and in this little piece over here, you've got multiple little tabs. Each one say different things. Now, the bottom one, if you solder it together, it is 6 volts if I'm not mistaken. If you solder the middle one together, it's 7.2. But these servos are 8.4, so you're going to solder the bottom and the middle one together to get 8.4 volts. Now, let me get all my electronics tied down to the vehicle, and I'll be right back so we can get some wheels installed and get out and go and give this thing a bit of testing. Okay, so now that I've got all my electronics tidied away, I've also fitted my battery up front. I will order a 4S smaller battery that can sit in this little square piece. I'll probably end up printing a 3D printed tray to keep it up front, but right now it'll be doing exactly what I wanted to do, and afterwards I do have a body that I might put on here, but for now let's get these wheels installed so we can get out and go and do some testing and get this video wrapped up. And I'm going to be using some XH pin from Injora. These tires performed quite good when I installed them and tested them on the Willis Jeep. Okay, so now that I've got all the wheels fitted, it's time to get this thing out and go and do a bit of testing. But as you can see on the table over here, it's a nice straight line. The drive shafts aren't sticking past the links. Besides that, we have got loads of articulation. Just check that out. It's completely crazy how much articulation we've got on this rig. And besides that, most of the weight is sitting in the front. I would say it's about 65% is up front. But for now, I'm going to leave you guys with some running footage. I hope you guys enjoyed this build. If you did, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And until the next video, happy trails, everyone.